January 4th, 1999, a date that wrestling fans will remember either fondly or not so fondly as the day that the Monday Night Wars completely shifted and the WWF kept surging ahead despite some really, really bad creative choices until they got rid of Vince Russo, and then some creative choices that were still goddamn questionable, but even with those bad creative choices, they could do no wrong. And on the other side, you had WCW that was still really competitive. Hell, on this show, they had 40,000 plus people in the Georgia Dome, the site of Bill Goldberg's biggest triumph in his brief professional wrestling career, becoming World Heavyweight Champion, defeating Hollywood Hulk Hogan, and then going on to have a title reign that in retrospect really wasn't all that well booked or featured, and then Kevin Nash brought into it at Starrcade 1998 just a few days prior, courtesy of Scott Hall's shock stick. But don't worry, folks, Goldberg's gonna get his revenge at the scene of his biggest triumph. At least that was the plan. But plans can go awry. And oh boy, did things go awry for World Championship Wrestling on January 4th, 1999. Boy, did they ever. I'm John Renton with the Retro View of WCW Nitro from January 4th, 1999. Yes, I already did a Retro View and also a rant about a portion of the January 4th, 1999 edition of Raw, because that Raw was taped a week prior. Yeah, Mick Foley's title win was on a taped Raw, and it beat this, because WCW could have handily, mightily beaten them. Even though WWF was making some really, really bad choices, they decided to give a big feel-good moment to the wrestling fans that genuinely loved Mick Foley. They appreciated him for his sacrifice and his humor and the fact they genuinely liked him. And sure, rewatching that show, they had the Terry Reynolds miscarriage angle that I ranted about, in regards to Vince Russo and Ed Ferrara's involvement, and you can check out that review. It's from about the 14-minute mark to the 22-minute mark. I said pretty much everything under the sun, and I stand by everything that I said. That being said, WCW, they shipped 40,000 people in the Georgia Dome. The Georgia Dome holds a significant amount of people, by the way. 60-something thousand. I forget the exact capacity, but still, 40,000 for a fucking TV taping. That is incredible. And yes, WWF, I believe, if I'm right, because it was WWF at the time, about maybe a month later, maybe about 5 weeks later, would hold a taping, I believe, in the Sky Dome and have about 41,000 or so people. And it was a big goddamn deal, because wrestling at this point in the Monday Night Wars was on fire. It was insane. And they fucked it up. Okay, the narrative is that the ratings completely dropped off next week. The ratings were actually still pretty good and fairly, competitive, but there was a sense that the heart was ripped out of WCW at this point. Just torn up, Kalima, Kalima, and it was. It was. I watched the Monday Night Wars live. Some people didn't. Some people can go back and rewatch this stuff. And look, if you rewatch all this stuff as far as like how Wrestling Bios does a reliving the war thing and is still doing that, and bless that guy for doing that, because there are some great moments, there are some absolutely dreadful moments on Raw, SmackDown, but it's mainly Raw and Nitro. And then when SmackDown came along and Thunder was just a goddamn dumpster fire, even though it gave people more work and the pay-per-views were here and there. WWF by no means was great in 99. They had Austin, they had Rock, they had mega stars, but then take a look at a lot of the other shit that was happening. And even after they got rid of Russo, did the creative really get a ton better? No, because Vince still felt that they needed to do the Crash TV stuff, and even though things would get a little bit better as far as allowing guys to go out and have a few competitive matches. It's honestly amazing that WWF somehow managed to basically take some stuff from ECW and then heap and carve out big stuff from ECW and make it presentable on television. And WCW is behind the times here. I mean, they were. Take a look at the matches they had here. This was when Nitro was 3 hours. I think Nitro became 3 hours in 98, and then 99, and then by 2000 it was back to 2 hours, if I recall correctly. Again, it's been years since I've watched all that stuff. I did rewatch the entire, timeline of WCW from the reboot episode, to the very last episode. And believe me, that was enough. If I had originally gone with my plan of watching from, say, Road Wild 99, or maybe even, the summer of 99, say, Great American Bash, and to the end, I probably would have gone completely insane, as opposed to what I did watching that. Nevertheless, this is well before Russo came along. Not that you could tell with how badly this show was booked. Granted, my, review of Raw does not paint WWF in the best light. You know, stuff with Foley was good. Head-to-head with a tape Raw, 40,000 plus people in the Georgia Dome. They couldn't figure out a way to have Goldberg beat Nash. And even if they were going to do a screwy finish, there was a better way to do it, and they didn't do it right. So, we have a dramatic video package with no narration of Goldberg and Nash. You would think that you were watching a movie or something. You would think that you were watching something, pretty dramatic. You wouldn't have a fucking clue what's going on if this is the first time you tuned into Nitro. And the Nitro Girls in Gold, I wonder how Spice is doing. Spice and Fire were actually, if I remember right, whoever the redhead was, they were pretty cute. What an atmosphere. In a giant football stadium, in a giant sports stadium. It was a hell of an atmosphere. And there were times where that crowd was dead quiet. Because, they killed a little bit of time. We had balloons and confetti. It's a dead company's party. Who could ask for more? That's just because Nash and Hogan showed the fans right to the door. Showed the fans and everybody right to the door. The ratings did stay competitive, at least until sometime in March or April. Super Bowl 9 did do pretty well as far as buy rates. I don't remember how Sold Out did. I'm actually going to do a retro review of Sold Out at a little bit later this month. And I do remember that show not being all that great. The atmosphere compared to Starrcade was not great, but at least that will give me a chronological finish to reviewing the Sold Out cards, i.e. all 4 of them. But there's a Nitro Party Suite. I don't know who this Jimmy guy was doing the interviews. I got nothing against him. I just have no idea who he was. Ric Flair's in charge after beating Bischoff last week when Randy Savage showed up and low-blowed the Giant and had the Gorgeous George, who never deserved to call herself Gorgeous George. Congratulations, Randy. You found an exotic dancer and called her Gorgeous George. Don't get me wrong. I love Randy Savage. Love him to death. That whole WWE biography was a goddamn hit piece. Anyway, 3-hour block here. The first hour was unopposed. So I'm going to tell you what they brought in the first hour. First match, about 6 minutes in, was Glacier against Hugh Morris. And bless Glacier. Hugh Morris, Bill DeMott's a fucking piece of shit for how he treated trainees. But later, Jimmy Hart did a little bit of he took a bump off the apron and everything. And you're like, oh, Glacier's going to win. No, he lost to No Laughing Matter 30, 45 seconds later. This match is 3 minutes. We didn't get another match for 22 minutes. They had the first hour here unopposed. They didn't even start with any of this Goldberg stuff until after Raw had come on the air. If they had started right after that and said Goldberg's going to be arrested and you had built that up, you would have had more time to justify, hey, he's being taken back. Because if you've seen this episode, you know what I'm talking about. If you don't know if you've never seen this episode and you're just relying on me to recap the whole goddamn thing without being snarky, well, I don't know what you're tuning in for, but thank you. Then they could have had 30 minutes left and Goldberg could have been caught in traffic or something or whatever. Or the processing was taking a while. The car wouldn't start. And they had to get him on horsey back or something. But anyway, Shivani, Larry, and Tenay call this and recount recent events, like Flair in his boxers ripping up money, like he's doing with all his endorsements now, like Woo Energy, or Woo Wings. Anyway, and how he was poisoned, and that's why he lost to Bischoff, and they had the heart issue thing, and this was really stupid. This is what Flair came back for. In hindsight, it would have been nice if Flair had actually won a lawsuit and maybe been able to show up at King of the Ring 98 like was reportedly supposed to maybe kind of happen. We wouldn't have gotten Flair back on Nitro in, I believe, Charlotte or Greensboro. I forget which exact city on the Nitro right after Fall Brawl 98, but nevertheless. Yeah, this is what they had Flair doing. And he was buried in the desert, like, I think about 11 months later. Maybe 10 months later. It's ridiculous. So Flair and Arn arrive, or all the Flairs, including David, Reed, and a young Charlotte, a young Ashley Flair, who I hope does recover from her various injuries that she endured and, took on. And basically that, ended up happening to her. Knee's basically fucked. she's probably done till at least Survivor Series. But this is about something that happened well before she ever got in the ring. So we follow him from the parking lot through the backstage area into the ring because we have 3 hours to kill, so we have to do that. Dean's on crutches. He had a sprained ankle and anal bleeding. What? Wow. So Flair is all smiles. He's grateful to people who helped, even Randy, who he's never seen eye to eye with. And he brings down Bischoff. Bischoff's very solemn. How Eric could be fired. Eric made Flair's life a living hell and everybody else's life a living hell, but he's going to be put on commentary. Shivani's going to be in charge of him. Eric proceeds to say absolutely nothing on commentary while this is going on. Randy Anderson, who I knew had passed away, I didn't realize it actually passed away in 2002, he was fired by Bischoff on TV. This was like 2 years prior. Oh, no, about almost 2 years prior. I think it was right after. Actually, it might have been, because I think it was right after Sold Out, NWO Sold Out in 97, so it would have been almost 2 years prior. He ends up being brought back at double the salary. Rest in peace, Randy Anderson, tremendous referee. And nobody ever really had a bad thing to say about him from what I understand. People respected him. And he thanks everyone who helped, including Savage, and there's going to be a match that's Sold Out, and David is going to be Flair's partner, and yeah. Oh boy, I'm really looking forward to seeing David Flair in the goddamn ring. Can't wait to dissect that and the fact that he was totally lost, and he admittedly it was like Mike Von Erich but worse. Yeah, I would go that far. Mike at least I think was trying, but he didn't want to be in the ring nearer to David, and Mike at least halfway. I don't know. It's hard to describe. Mike's career was also a lot briefer. And then we didn't see him we wanted to go to the Cotton Bowl to see him back. Check out my Iron Claw review if you want. Arn says he knows what he's doing. Creative sure doesn't. Booker T versus Henry Hale, who was a big lad, a very big lad, actually. Kind of like a Snitsky with more hair. Yeah, 22 minutes after that previous match ended, and all that talking, all that stuff, Eric does a little on commentary, a meat whistle drop kick for 3 in a minute. Maybe. That's the first match we get. Fine. I'm not saying Booker should have been competitive with Henry Hale, whoever he is. Nothing against the guy. But, Jesus. Nitro girls do more dancing. Or chair dances. Let me just say Spice. Good God. I wonder how she's doing. Eric still solemn and morose. Norman Smiley took on Chavo Guerrero Jr., who had a horse, the fake horse head thing, Pepe or Pepe 2 Electric Boogaloo. And Norman was very good. He got the comedy down, busting his big wiggle out. Have fun on seeing that. And the Sunset Flip wins it. Norman snaps and then breaks the horse apart, and that's why I believe we get that match again at Sold Out over a fake horse. They are fighting over shampoo. So, yeah, we get a recap of what we just saw, sponsored by Skittles. I remember when Skittles were good. I don't mind some Skittles now, but some flavors, the tropical one just doesn't work for me. Wild berry is almost too sweet. It actually gives me a headache. And has been giving me a headache for the past 10 years. So maybe that says something about me. Or maybe it just means I need to be better at my diet. So, Benoit took on Horace Hogan. Okay, so at this point, Raw was about to start. Because taking a look at the time code and everything, Raw was an hour and 35 minutes. Nitro was 2 hours and 22 minutes and a few seconds. I think 40-something seconds. So, you take the fact that with an overrun and everything, this is about the point, during this match where Raw starts. So people are going to be flipping back and forth or taping. And this was what they were doing. And plenty against Benoit as a person, but at least as a talent, you could understand why they'd feature him. But Horace Hogan did a dive, which is about the only wrestling move I've ever seen Horace Hogan do without botching. Lord knows he knows how to botch a chair shot. Boy, does he ever. Halloween Havoc 98, big superplex. Diving headbutt, but that doesn't get a cover. Horace somehow manages to hit a shoulder breaker, but then gets locked in a cripple crossface, and that's it. So we go back to the locker room, and this is how they are featuring Goldberg in his homecoming. We are about 48, maybe 50 minutes into the show now. And, taking out commercials and all that, still, this is what they're doing. They have him in a long thing talking to a bunch of cops that he knows and everything. You know me, and I'm not thrilled of aggressive stalking. What the hell's going on here? They find that out when they get to the police station. This is not a good way, and had even worse payoff. You do what you got to do. Creative at this point just thrown up their hands and said, we don't know what to do with Goldberg because we brought him out of the power plant too quick and everything, and he's injured pretty much everybody he's worked with. Nash is pissed. I got a match with him. And then Hogan shows up because Hogan's being all political and was going to announce his vice president. Could you imagine if Hogan tried to run in 2000? I mean, we know how he would have run, what party he would have run for. But even taking that to the side, could you imagine Hogan running for president? Legit running for president. It would have actually been hilarious. Saturn took on Jericho, referee Scott Dickinson. The referee has had tension with Saturn because of run-ins and accidental stuff, and that played into this. That wasn't bad. I mean, Eric still says nothing. Saturn was very good for a short time. I think pretty much after 2003, that was about the last time anybody really remembers anything he did. I think he worked in TNA a little bit, NWA TNA, a referee bump. And then while the referee's down, Jericho hits a low blow, and then we get a DQ because why not? Because the referee's upset at Saturn. Then we find out why that happened a little bit quicker, or a little bit later on, and why it happened so quickly. To the police station. We're across the street. Maybe it is. I don't know anything about Atlanta. I don't know where the Georgia Dome is. I don't know if the police precinct is right over there, or used to be. Maybe it moved. Maybe it got sent up into space for the neglectful treatment of people that were innocent. Possibly. Maybe. So the detectives are with Miss Elizabeth, who I just gotta say is incredibly beautiful. I wish she was still here, but she couldn't do anything with this bad creative. Nobody could, and she was really not very good here. More Nitro Girl dancing. Again, Spice, my God. And Nitro Party stuff with drunks. Then again, I think everybody putting this show together was drunk. Interrogation. Elizabeth is a terrible liar. First I see him here. They do all this. I'm not breaking all this stuff down because my brain nearly melted rewatching this stuff. LWO party somewhere. In a vortex, apparently. Maybe it was the house in Night of the Bastard. If you've seen that movie, you know what I'm talking about. That is a deep cut for maybe 3 people that have seen that movie. It's actually not bad. Check it out. Eddie was out by this point, unfortunately. The LWO would not be around much longer because Eddie had been in a car accident New Year's Eve or New Year's Day. I think it was New Year's Eve. And would be out for quite a while. And unfortunately, that would lead to more painkiller and alcohol addiction until he hit rock bottom. Got cleaned up, and there you are. So, then we're at the halfway point. We've had, I'm dead serious, maybe 15 minutes of wrestling. The halfway point. So we are about 90 minutes in. And that's how much we've had. And so maybe I shouldn't complain so much about some of the TV time dedicated to wrestling and everything, and taking the breaks in the commercial now because they were doing it even then. And that's the thing. 3 hours of Nitro would have been fine. But doing 2 hours of Thunder on top of that was even worse. So Heenan joins commentary. Kidman and Ray took on Hoovy and Psychosis in a tornado tag. And unfortunately, this didn't click. It really didn't. It was more about Ray getting away from the LWO because the LWO is pretty much done. While it was the best thing on the show as far as the few spots you got to see, this was not their best stuff. We got a miscue, an accidental drop kick to the back of Ray's head from Kidman when there was a switch, and the guillotine leg drop from Psychosis 1, 2, 3. Kidman was still the Cruiserweight champion, did not take the fall here. It made sense. Ray was the odd man out. And Goldberg's at the station, You're talking about all this stuff and how Liz saw me at this gym. That's because I'm always there because I own that gym. Forgot that he owned a gym, actually. No wonder he would make money outside of wrestling, because owning a gym and charging a membership, even if you charge a decent fee, probably would do that. Mean Gene brings out Nash. Goldberg got screwed. Yeah, you were part of the reason he got screwed. No, Nash wasn't booking then. Not saying he was. But Nash could have just said, we could veto this and do something else. Anyway, he blames Hogan for all this. He wants to face Hogan tonight, and then he'll face Goldberg right after if he can get out. Flair agrees. There we go. And then we get another video package on Goldberg and Nash, apparently resetting the show and starting over to justify the existence of all that other bullshit that we saw. Liz interrogation. Goldberg, is just... Goldberg's harassing her on the phone, but hanging up. How does she know it's him? Maybe it's Maybe it's your husband calling, wondering where the hell you are, Liz, because you were sleeping around on him or boyfriend when you were getting with Lex, who was also married. I love Liz, but she was not so innocent in that, but Lex still contributed to her death. I stand by that. Anyway, Mean Gene is in the ring, brings out Hogan, and Hogan is all like, oh, the fans were going to see his retirement, but then he found out what kind of deviant Goldberg was. Pot calling the kettle by a guy that, basically put tanning lotion on his daughter and was hitting on his daughter. No wonder Hogan supports a certain former disgraced president. Makes sense. But, later on, obviously. And the Wolf... Basically, he will face Kevin Nash, and the Wolfpack is huffing and puffing, but I'm going to beat Nash, and you can call me the big, Hollywood, the big bad wolf. Aru. Classic. Shivani then puts the infamous lineup. Folks, if you're even thinking about, changing to our competition, don't bother. Because we learned, because their show is taped, that tonight Mick Foley, you remember Mick Foley, he's going to win their world title. That's going to put some butts in the seats. I'm not knocking Shivani here. I like Shivani. Even if Shivani gets a little bit over the top in AEW. I don't think that Shivani was that bad on commentary. I'm not saying he was the greatest, but he was the voice of WCW for a number of years. He was instructed to do that. I'm betting Bischoff would. Even though Bischoff was there on commentary, I bet Bischoff is probably like, hey, Tony, you should mention that. And let's mention that, and then it'll be like they won't turn over there because none of our crowd, or not enough wrestling fans, care about Foley except they do. And then we saw what happened there. So, the WCW MasterCard. I remember some people actually having those. I remember... talking to a few people that I knew that were older adults as opposed to younger adults. Because at the time this show was around, I was just about to turn 18. Yes, I'm old, I know. And the MasterCard ad, it was just kind of funny because I remember people having those. And I'm thinking that was really cool just to see wrestlers on credit cards. So anyway, footage of Jericho and Scott Dickinson. Does anybody still have a WCW MasterCard? Genuinely, did anybody ever have that? Hold up a hand if you did. Scott Dickinson basically was told by Jericho, hey, if Saturn screws with you, DQ him. And Scott Steiner shows up with Buff Bagwell in a giant hat. Scott says, well, he's been censored by WCW for too long. He will take the women away from their redneck husbands that are always pumping gas and always doing this stuff. Work is work, just want to say. And also that he's a TV champion and WCW can't censor him anymore, and Scott just didn't give a fuck at this point. I mean, still doesn't, but really didn't give a fuck. And then, I'm out of control, I'm out of my mind, and I'm loving it. That would actually not only describe Scott, but pretty much everybody backstage in WCW at this point. And then Buff makes fun of Flair's bypass. So anyway, Conan then took on Scott Steiner because we needed this, revenge match. And Eric doesn't say much of anything. He does a little bit later. But Shivani basically again says, Mick Foley's going to win their world title. That's going to be their world champion. Ha ha. I felt bad for Shivani. I really did. He got targeted way too much for that shit. But it was 2-on-1 and in a DQ, and this match maybe went 3 minutes. I think combined on this show, there was less than an hour of wrestling on a 3-hour show. Even if you take out the commercials, even if you take out the commercials, actually, it's worse that you don't get to see an hour of wrestling on TV, because that means in a 2-hour, 22-minute episode, outside, 3 hours outside the commercial, 3 hours 5, 3 hours 6, because of the overrun, that's what you're getting. That's pretty disgraceful. So, apologies, by the way, if I still sound a little bit off. I'm still getting over a cold. So, Robinson then gets tossed out, takes a pretty great bump over the top. No wonder Robinson seemed to be limping around at some later WWF shows. And I'm not laughing at his injuries, but just like the willingness he had to take those bumps. Sold Out 99 ad. Yes, I will retro review that. It might be in a week. Just right now, since I'm recording this. I'm recording this on the 5th. I had a lot of stuff to review the past few days and also need rest, so I'll do what I can. We are going to get a bit of a snowstorm, possibly, maybe, so we'll see just how how stressed I am. I hate driving in the snow. But Wrath then says, I've been on a pretty good streak here, and that the people here paid to see me give someone the meltdown in the dome. I guarantee there was not one goddamn person in that dome that said, I got to see Wrath. And I got nothing against Brian Clark. He had a great look. He was a Night Stalker, and then he was Adam Bomb, then he was Wrath, and he became Brian Clark as part of Chronic. Did one person in the dome that night pay to see, I got to see Wrath? They might have been happy to see Wrath. I don't think he was the reason to see it, but maybe not. And then Eric basically said his first line was Goldberg's jailbait. That maybe jailbird is what he meant to say. And Goldberg's a jailbird. Bam Bam then comes down to face Wrath in an open challenge, and this was brutal. Bam Bam was a shell of who he was. Wrath was never exactly great in the ring. Had to have the right guy to face him. And Bam Bam brings a chair in at one point after they fought outside for a couple minutes of this very short match. And then brought a chair in. The referee took it away. Bam Bam took a backdrop, but the referee kicked it out. And unfortunately kicked it out right by the stairs. And then they did an over-the-top, a tumble over the top. And Bam Bam spilled and hit his head right on the back of the chair legs. Ouch. I mean, the chair was flattened, but still, you're hitting, already hitting his head on the floor mat probably wouldn't have felt great, but he is head on a metal object. We end up with a double DQ. And that's not even the semi-main, by the way. This show has been absolutely dreadful to rewatch, by the way, well before this. More police stuff. Liz couldn't make this shit work. And then finally she says that she was lying. And she kept checking her watch to delay Goldberg from getting his shot because you would be in jail for making a false police report, just want to say. More Nitro Girl action. I wonder again how Spice and Fire are doing. And the redhead, if her name wasn't Fire. So, Eric did not care at all. Had his feet up on the desk. To be fair, he was battling a whole bunch of TBS executives that knew nothing about wrestling, and I get it, but it's not like Eric's knowledge of wrestling was anything beyond surface level. Listen to interviews with him. He thinks he created a lot more stuff than he actually did when he created some great atmosphere, but he took a lot of stuff like a lot of people do. He just needs to admit it. Bryan Adams, not that one with Vincent, took on DDP, but Bryan Adams, who was Kona Crush and Demolition, Crush and Crush. So Dallas, DDP that is, Dallas, went through the people, and he had to put up with a whole lot of shit. This was their semi-main. Some point during this match, Mankind and The Rock at least started their entrances. DDP selling for Vincent, goddamn, this is fucking ridiculous. And he hit a top rope diamond cutter, 1, 2, 3, and there we are. So, anyway, DDP ends up going through the crowd. Then Goldberg is freed, but not in time. I do want to point out, by the way, something from earlier. Goldberg had to get in the back of an old, Ford Taurus. I think it was a Ford Taurus. Were there no other actual police cars? Because that would barely... Not a standard police officer wouldn't be able to fit in one of those goddamn cars. I remember driving one of those cars. I remember having to ride in one of those cars. Driving a drunk friend back in one of those. They ain't exactly roomy. So nevertheless, and I'm not talking about the station wagon. I'm talking about the standard four-door without, the hatchback or snatchback, whatever it's called. So the main event of this program starts during the time. Now, this is with 12 minutes left, including the overrun. Starts, with Michael Buffer stumbling and lisping more than Cody Rhodes during any standard promo this time. Doing all this stuff, and Hogan comes out with Scott Steiner. Nash comes out with about $8 million worth of pyro. Okay, maybe it was like 80 grand worth of pyro, but still, that was a lot of goddamn pyro. Scott Hall comes out with him, and it's a big deal. We're down to 6 minutes by the time these guys even get to the ring. So the overrun is pretty much where everybody saw this whole thing. So, okay, we're going to get this Titanic Clash. It's going to be quick. And Nitro fans, WCW fans should have known something was going to be up. I knew something was up because I do actually recall. I recall watching this afterwards, and at the time there was no internet. I mean, I had a couple friends, like I had one friend actually that called me pretty goddamn late. Hey, if you're going to watch Nitro before you go to school tomorrow, because yes, still had to finish a year of high school, or, finish that year of high school. Excuse me. Just watch this, but just be prepared, okay? I remember staying up to watch it. I would actually do that sometimes. I'd watch Raw live and then watch Nitro on tape or vice versa. And by this point, I was watching Raw live and watching Nitro on tape. And sometimes I wouldn't even watch Nitro until Wednesday. Hogan makes his entrance, all this stuff. And they face off. And all this, and, Nash does the pose. And then Hogan, finger poke, fall, 1, 2, 3. And a few fans popped like, oh, we didn't expect that. And a lot of fans were like, the fuck are these guys doing? And then suddenly Goldberg shows up with all the guys. I'm throwing away my notes here. Goldberg shows up with the police and runs in and everything and takes out various people, hits a spear on Hogan, and then is going to, take out Hogan again. He's going to take him out with a jackhammer. Luger's down there to do all that and everything, and then he attacks Goldberg. And then Scott Hall has the taser again, and Eric's like, the new world heavyweight champion. He's yelling all around, what the hell is he doing here? All this. And then he gets shocked and yeah. That's what they did. They spray painted Goldberg's head. They beat the shit out of him. People are throwing trash in the ring, but not like, oh, Hogan turned heel at Bash at the Beach, and it's absolutely brutal, and we hate him for it. It's like, no, we hate what you're doing here. The NWO hadn't even been thought of, at least en masse, since basically dissolving at Halloween Havoc 98. Yes, you still had the Wolfpack theme, and you still had people that loved the NWO, but they could have just had it fade away, but they had to reform this. And I'll close with this. This was the moment where WCW hit the iceberg and started to sink. Even though the ratings would still stay up a bit, this would just be the beginning of the end. It would. Super Brawl 9 may have done big buy rates. Spring Stampede, which was a much better pay-per-view than anything they presented recently, did 250,000 buys, or thereabouts. But Nash always says the plan was to get a faction together and then give Goldberg a run to eventually face Hogan at like Starrcade or a big event. But then Goldberg put his arm through a window. Here's the problem with that. Goldberg did that about 10 minutes, or 10 minutes, but, almost a year later. So apparently Nash just can't remember timelines at all. Yeah, and that whole idea with the finger poke of doom didn't end up working, and basically WCW eroded. Welcome to the end of the Monday Night Wars, even though they go on for about another 26 months. Officially, I guess. Agree, disagree, what I said, like, share, subscribe, Twitter handle in the description. I'm John Rethlin. I'll see you soon.